If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand technology. Good evening, everyone. I, Arpita Priya, warmly welcome all of you on behalf of Forensic Fusion to today's most awaited lecture on information security, the digital trade. It's an honor to have attendees joining from various parts of the country to explore the fundamentals of information security. Before we start the session, I would take a minute to briefly introduce the organization Forensic Fusion, which is a forward thinking forensic education platform registered with MSME, Government of India. It offers free and accessible forensic science education to students, professionals, and enthusiasts, fostering a vibrant learning community. Through its diverse offering, including specialized courses, immersive internships, expert led webinars, interactive workshops, distinguished guest lectures, and simulating competition, Forensic Fusion provides a dynamic platform for students and professionals to explore the intricacies of forensic science. Additionally, the organization enriches its online presence through thought provoking case studies and insightful articles features on its website, as well as educational videos on its official YouTube channel, further enhancing the learning experience. Data is the new oil, but unlike oil, it leaks, John Chambers rightly said. There are two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they have been hacked. In a world where every action leaves a digital footprint, information security decides whether your story stays yours or becomes someone else's weapon. Now, without any further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. It's my absolute honor to introduce Mr. Swapnil Bhattacharya, a dynamic and multi talented individual whose academic and professional journey stands as the benchmark for aspiring forensic science students. He is the visionary founder of Forensic Fusion, a fast growing education initiative dedicated to democratizing forensic science learning across India. A natural leader and educator, Mr. Bhattacharya brings with him a wealth of experience, having volunteered with numerous reputed forensic organizations. He has served as a core team member in multiple organizations over the years and now holds the esteemed position of Chief Operating Officer at White Crime, a media platform which is actively involved in shaping the intersection of journalism, law, and forensic investigation. His professional portfolio is robust with over 250 accredited certifications from globally recognized platforms and institutions. He holds multiple diplomas from Ellison University in domains including psychology, child psychology, educational psychology, legal studies, digital forensic investigation, cybersecurity, technical skills for educators, cybersecurity, computer forensic, and counterterrorism, information technology, mental health, geology, physics geology, advanced diploma in training of trainers. These qualifications reflect not just theoretical understanding, but also apply proficiency across discipline vitals to modern forensic practices. Mr. Bhattacharya has also completed several prestigious internships, including a 1 month online legal internship with Juris Corpus and highly competitive offline internship as an investigating officer with Tripura Police, giving him 6 months of rare hand-on exposure to field-level crime investigation procedures. In addition to his forensic acumen, he is deeply invested in the future with a growing command over emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and prompt engineering. His multiple certifications in this area position him at the forefront of technological innovation within forensic science. Mr. Bhattacharya is not just a student or a professional. He is a movement in himself, inspiring others through his relentless pursuit of knowledge, excellence, and societal impact. Please join me in welcoming the remarkable Swapnil Bhattacharya. Before we begin, here are a few general instructions for everyone. Please keep your microphone muted and cameras on during the session. If you have any question or doubts during the lecture, feel free to drop them in the chat box. These will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end. Once again, thank you for being here. Let's make this an engaging and insightful session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Arpita. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture. Firstly, I would like to thank Arpita for the warm welcome and her kind words. So now I would be sharing the screen. Can you guys please let me know if my screen is visible and am I properly audible? Yes.
Yes, sir, the screen is visible.
Okay, great. So before we begin, just a small disclaimer, guys, do not treat this PPT as ultimate, okay? Because these are just slides for visual representation. There may be mistakes. I would share the notes after the class ends, right? But for now, please try to follow whatever I am speaking, and this is just as a reference material. Fine. Let's begin. So, let me start this lecture by giving a small question. I want you to actually think about it carefully. If I get access to your phone for just 5 minutes, how much damage do you think I can do? Anyone? Would anyone like to answer? Okay, then just think about it seriously. Think beyond just your gallery, your photos. I'm talking about your email, your Instagram, banking apps, OTPs, and whatnot. I could reset your passwords, I could impersonate you, maybe even lock you out of your own accounts. And the most scary part? I don't even need to be a genius hacker to do this. That is exactly why we are studying information security. Let us start the session by understanding what information is. Information is basically anything meaningful, processed data, something that answers a question or gives us some context. Raw facts by themselves do not help much until they are interpreted. Like, for example, 98.6 by itself, it is just a number, right? But when you say 98.6 degree Fahrenheit is a normal human body temperature, then it becomes information because it now has some meaning attached to it. It has some relevance. Data, on the other hand, is raw, unprocessed facts. Information is what you get after organizing and interpreting that data. So, the key difference here is that data is basically input and information is nothing but output with meaning. Till now, is everything clear? Till now, is everything clear? Okay, fine. Let's move on. Now, defining security. Let us first start by understanding what security is. Security simply means protecting something valuable from unauthorized access, damage, or misuse. It could be something physical, like let's say locking your room, protecting your daily journal or diary, or anything digital, like protecting your phone with a password. At its core, security is about three things. First, preventing access. Second, is to detect, identify active threats, right? And the third part is basically about responding if something in case goes wrong. Now, let us understand what computer security is. Initially, when computers started being used, security was very basic and limited. It was mainly about protecting the machine itself and controlling who could log in. Back then, computers were large, isolated systems used by government or big organizations. So, security basically meant things like password protection, user authentication, and restricting physical access to computers. There was no internet like today, so threats were minimal and mostly internal. Now, we need to understand how it evolved into the modern concept of information security. As technology grew, especially with the rise of the internet, everything changed. Data started moving across networks, being shared globally, stored in clouds, and accessed remotely. Now, the focus shifted from just protecting computers to protecting the information itself, no matter where it existed. This gave rise to the modern concept of InfoSec or information security, which is all about protecting data and information in all forms, digital, physical, or even verbal. For example, let us talk about WhatsApp chats. Your WhatsApp chats need encryption, right? Your bank details need confidentiality, and similarly, any company's database needs protection from hackers. Modern information security revolves around these three cores. First is information. First is confidentiality, which means only authorized people can access the information. Okay, so the slides are falling behind, I guess. You can just see this is about the evolution of security that I just discussed. Now, the core principles. Yeah, so the first is confidentiality, which means only authorized people can access that information. Integrity, which means the information should not be altered or tampered with. And availability, which means that the information should be available or accessible whenever needed, right? So, this is how the triangle looks, and it is something we know as the CIA triad. So, in short, we moved from protecting computers to protecting information everywhere. And that shift is exactly why information security is a critical field today. Most people think that cybersecurity is only about big companies or governments, but that is completely wrong. Every single one of you sitting here is actually a target. Why? Because your data has value. Even something as basic as your email account. It can be used to launch attacks on others. Companies lose millions, individuals lose identities. And sometimes people do not even realize that they have been hacked until it's very late. So, to understand this clearly, security is not just optional. And in today's era, it is basically more about survival, right? So, everything in information security basically boils down to these three core principles. If you remember nothing else from today, I want you to at least remember these three things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. As I said earlier, this is called the CIA triad. Confidentiality here means only authorized people should see the data. For example, your WhatsApp messages. If someone else can read them without your permission, then the confidentiality is broken. And how do we protect it? We can protect it using passwords, encryption, and access controls. Right? Moving on to integrity. Integrity means that the data should not be altered or tampered with. Imagine your exam marks being changed in the system. That would be an integrity failure. Even if no one steals the data, just modifying it is enough to cause serious damage. We protect integrity using hashing, checksums, and validation mechanisms. And lastly, availability, which means the data should be accessible when you need it. What's the point of having secure data if your system is down during an exam or a transaction, right? If a website crashes due to a cyber attack, there's an availability issue. So, backups, servers, redundancy, all of that comes under availability. Now, let's clear one of the most confused topics. Most people mix these three all the time: threat, vulnerability, and risk. Think of it like this: a vulnerability is basically a weakness. For example, using 123456 as your password. A threat is something that can exploit that weakness. For example, it could be a hacker or a malware. And risk is the actual chance of something bad happening. Plus, how bad could it be? Take a simple example. If you leave your house door open, right? If you leave your house door open, then that's a vulnerability. There is a thief in your area, that is a threat. And getting robbed, that's the risk. And here is the key point: you cannot eliminate all threats, okay? But you can reduce the vulnerabilities, which reduces the risk. In simple terms, that a forensic scientist would understand, it means you cannot eliminate all thieves, but you can keep your doors closed and you can reduce the risk of getting robbed. Is that clear till now? Is everything clear till now? Can anyone please respond?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ronak. Fine. Let's move on. Now, here is something I want you to actually understand. Most cyber criminals don't happen, or most cyber attacks do not happen because of super advanced hacking techniques. They basically happen because of simple mistakes. It could be weak passwords, it could be you clicking on the fake links, not updating your software. And in fact, attackers do not basically break systems, they just exploit your carelessness. This is where things get interesting because in the next part of the lecture, we are going to talk about how attacks actually happen. And trust me, some of them are so simple that you will start questioning your own habits. Now, let's get into the part that actually makes information security real. This is part 2 of the lecture. Okay. So, the anatomy of an attack. Because until you understand how attacks happen, all the theory we discussed won't make much sense. Most people imagine hackers sitting in a dark rooms, right? Writing complex codes, but the truth actually is much simpler. Yes. So, the majority of attacks succeed not because of advanced technology, but because of human mistakes. The easiest and the most common category of attacks is actually social engineering. So, I have prepared, you could call it a mind map, right? Here you have just the names of all the kinds of attacks, right? This could be your reference, right? Now, please try to follow what I am speaking, okay? Because I am speaking about each one of these attacks, right? So, the easiest and the most common category of attacks is social engineering. This is where attackers manipulate people instead of systems. For example, phishing emails. You might receive an email that looks exactly like it's from your bank account or any popular service, right? It could be Amazon, it could be Flipkart, it could be something, right? Asking you to log in or to reset your password. And the link would look very real. So the design looks real, but the moment you enter your credentials, you have practically handed them directly to the attacker. There are also other forms like pretexting, like where someone creates a fake story to gain your trust, or baiting, where attackers leave something tempting, like a free download or a USB drive that actually contains malware. The harsh reality is that humans are basically the weakest link in security, and attackers know that really well. Now, moving to the technical attacks, this is what most people traditionally think of when they hear hacking. One major category here is malware, right? So, let's talk about malwares. Does anyone have any idea what malware actually is? Please unmute and answer because I'm not able to see the chats right now. Anyone?
Sir, it can be a software which is intentionally designed to cause disruption. Yes.
Yes. Yes, so basically it is nothing but a malicious code, right? A malware is basically a malicious code or a software which is causing intentional disruption. This can include viruses that attach themselves to the files. It can be worms that spread automatically across networks, and Trojan horses, right, that disguise themselves as legitimate software, and ransomware, which locks your data and demands payment to restore access. These are the types, right? Ransomware basically has become extremely common these days because it directly generates money for the attackers. Another important category can be men in the middle, right? So, for network attacks, for example, a man in the middle attack, it happens when an attacker secretly intercepts communication between two parties. For example, imagine connecting to a public Wi Fi network and someone capturing your data without you even realizing it. Then there are distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS, like we popularly know it, right? This is where attackers flood the system with so much traffic that it crashes and becomes unavailable. Packet sniffing is again another technique where attackers capture data packets traveling over a network, which can reveal sensitive information if not properly encrypted. Next, let's talk about web based attacks, which target websites and applications. One of the most common one is SQL injection. This happens when attackers insert malicious input into a website's database query, allowing them to access or manipulate data they should not have access to. Another is cross-site scripting, or XSS, where attackers inject scripts into web pages that execute in users' browsers, potentially stealing session data or redirecting users to malicious websites. These attacks are extremely dangerous because they exploit poor coding practices rather than user mistakes. Finally, we have authentication attacks. So here you can see I have just made some slides where I have written about each one of these categories individually, right? And here the categorizing part. And this is basically just an overview where you can see the attack type, method, target, underlying failure, everything in a tabular form. So we were talking about authentication attacks, which focus on breaking into accounts. The simplest one, which most of you I believe have heard, is brute force, where attackers try every possible password combination until they get the correct one. Then there are dictionary attacks. Dictionary attacks are basically the attacks where attackers use a list of common passwords. And one of the most effective modern techniques is credential stuffing, where attackers take leaked username and passwords from one data breach and try them on multiple platforms. Because people tend to reuse passwords. This is why using the same password everywhere is the worst habit that one could have. Because if one account gets compromised, then all your accounts are at risk. So if you look at all of these attacks together, a pattern becomes very clear. Attackers are not breaking in, most of the times they are being let in, either through human error, weak systems, right? It could be human error, it could be weak systems, it could be poor security practices, right? What we call digital hygiene. That's the key mindset that you need to develop. Don't just think about how attacks or systems work, think about how they fail. Because that's exactly what attackers are looking for. Now that you have seen how attacks actually happen, the next logical question is how we defend against them, right? This brings us to the next section, that is defensive architecture. This is where security mechanisms come in. At the very most basic level, security mechanisms are the tools, techniques, and processes used to protect the systems and data. At first distinction, you need to understand clearly what authentication is and what authorization means. So, authentication basically answers the question that who are you, which is typically done using passwords, biometrics, or multi factor authentication, right? Authorization, on the other hand, answers what you are allowed to do, which determines the access levels after identity is verified. Beyond that, we usually use access control models like the discretionary access control, right? Here I have written DAC, right? Discretionary access control. Then we use the MAC, that is mandatory access control, and RBAC, that is role based access control, right? In the role based access control, the permissions are assigned based on the roles, while in the mandatory access control, rules are enforced by the system. Another key concept in defense in depth, which means you never rely on a single layer of security. Instead, you stack multiple layers such as firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, encryption, and user awareness, so that if one layer is failing, right, then some other layer would still be there protecting the system. Here you can see I have just shown the layered approach, right? Next, we can move on to the threat levels, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Any doubts till now?
No, sir.
Okay. So we'll just move on. So when we talk about threats, it's important to classify them properly because not all threats are same. Broadly, threats can be categorized as natural, accidental, and intentional. As the name suggests, the natural threats include events like floods, earthquakes, or fires that can damage the infrastructure. Accidental threats are caused by human error, like let's say misconfigurations, accidental data deletion, or sending sensitive data to the wrong person. Intentional threats are deliberate attacks carried out by individuals or groups, including hackers, insiders, or even nation states. Right? Another useful classification is internal versus external threats because internal threats come from those within the organization, often from the employees, who either misuse the access or make mistakes, while external threats originate from those who are outside the organization, such as the cyber criminals who are attempting unauthorized access. Understanding the type of threat is helpful because it helps you in designing the right defensive strategy. Security also needs to be built into systems from the very beginning, not added later as an afterthought, as that's where the system development life cycle comes in, right? In a secure SDLC, the security is integrated into every phase. During the requirements phase, security needs are identified, such as compliance, data protection requirements. Then comes the design phase, where the secure architectures are planned, including threat modeling to identify potential weaknesses early. During implementation, developers follow secure coding practices to avoid vulnerabilities like SQL injection. In the testing phase, security testing such as penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, these are conducted. Then during deployment, systems are configured securely and in the maintenance phase, continuous monitoring, patching and updates are performed. The key idea is very simple, okay, but it is again very critical. Fixing security issues later is far more expensive and difficult than preventing them early. So you are just taking some preventive measures. This is the SDLC waterfall methodology that I have just drawn for your reference. If you want to learn more about it, then you can definitely let me know and I would share some other notes with you. Okay, now that we have discussed SDLC, the next very obvious thing is CNSS security model. This is an important model that helps us understand security from a structured perspective. Again, CNS's security model is also known as the Macomber Cube, as it was created by John Macomber in 1991. This model is a comprehensive framework used to evaluate information security, and it has evolved from the traditional CIA triad that we just spoke about. Because the triad was viewed as no longer adequate to address the constantly changing threat environment. It is nothing but a graphical representation, as you can see here, right? Of the architectural approach of information security that can be depicted by these 27 cells, right? These are the 27 cubes that you can see. This model looks at the security across three dimensions. The first dimension, it is very critical and is definitely known as the critical information characteristics or goals, right? Then we have the second dimension, which is the information states, right? The first dimension, that is goals, it is basically nothing but the CIA triad, which you already know: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Second, however, focuses on information states, meaning data can be at rest, can be in transit, or can be in processing. So, simply, the state of data which includes storage, processing, and transmission, right? The third dimension involves the security measures. It includes technology, policies, and human factors. So it's basically nothing but the methods that are used to protect data. Specifically, it can be policy, education, or technology. Just remember these three, okay? For first dimension, remember the CIA triad, that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For the second dimension, just remember the three things, that is the states of information or data. It can be storage phase, processing phase, or transmission phase. So these three things. And for the third one, again, remember three things: policy, education, and technology. Now, what this model essentially tells you is that security is not one dimensional. You need to protect different types of data in different states using different approaches. If even one combination is ignored, then it creates a gap that the attackers can exploit. Just to give you a practical example, a security professional using the model might look at the intersection of technology, integrity, and storage. This would require implementing a control such as host intrusion detection prevention, right? Which uses technology to protect integrity of a file while the file is being stored. So notice how all three dimensions are being covered. They are getting intersected, right? Now let us talk about some actual technologies used in real world security. Starting with VPNs. So this is what a VPN basically does, right? So a virtual private network, it creates a secure tunnel, right? An encrypted tunnel between your device and a remote server over the internet. Normally, when you send data over the internet, it can potentially be intercepted. But when you use a VPN, your data is encrypted before it leaves your device, travels through this secure tunnel, and is often decrypted at the destination server. This means even if someone intercepts the data, they cannot read it. VPNs are most commonly used for secure remote access, especially in organizations where employees need to connect to internal systems from outside networks, like a work from home employee, for an example. Now, firewalls are another fundamental security mechanism. A firewall, yeah, a firewall acts as a barrier between trusted internal network and untrusted external network, like the internet. It monitors the incoming and outgoing traffic and decides whether to allow or block it based on some predefined rules. There are different types of firewalls. They can be packet filtering firewalls, like which examine the packets based on IP addresses, ports, and protocols. Stateful inspection firewalls. They track active connections and make decisions based on state of the traffic. Proxy firewalls act as intermediaries, hiding the internal network from the external systems. Then the next generation firewalls, which go even further by including features like deep packet inspection and application level filtering. Key idea is that firewall controls the traffic, but they are not foolproof. This is where intrusion detection and prevention systems come in. Yeah, detection system and intrusion prevention system. Right. So, an intrusion detection system or IDS monitors network or system activity and alerts when suspicious behavior is detected. It does not actively block the attack, it just notifies you. An intrusion prevention system, however, goes a step further by automatically taking action to block or prevent the detected threats. These systems can be signature based, where they detect known attack patterns, or anomaly based, where they identify unusual behavior that deviates from normal patterns. In modern environments, IDS and IPS are often combined into a single system, that is Intrusion Detection and Prevention System, called IDPS, providing both detection and prevention capabilities. At this point, it must be very clear to you that information security is not a small and simple field. What we have covered so far is just a fraction of it. In reality, information security spans cryptography, network security, application security, cloud security, digital forensics, risk management, compliance, and even human psychology. Entire careers are built around just one of these areas, so trying to cover complete information security in a 90-minute lecture is honestly impossible. The goal of this session is not to make you an expert, but to give you the right mindset and a foundational understanding so that you can explore deeper on your own. If you leave this meeting thinking more critically about systems, questioning trust, and being aware of risk, then the lecture has already done its job. Now we will look at two real life case studies, right? So for the first case study, we have the Equifax breach. I'm really sorry, actually I'm having some allergies. So, okay, let's move on. Yeah, the first case study is the Equifax data breach, one of the most damaging data breaches in history. In 2017, the attackers exploited a known vulnerability in a web application framework, for which a patch had already been released months earlier, but never applied by Equifax. A single failure allowed attackers to gain access to internal systems and remain undetected for over 2 months. During this time, they were able to extract highly sensitive personal data, including names, social security numbers, birth dates, and addresses of approximately 147 million people, which is nearly half of the US population. The breach went unnoticed partly because a critical security certificate had expired, which disabled monitoring systems that were supposed to detect suspicious activity. What makes this case extremely important is that it was not caused by advanced hacking techniques but by basic security failures like poor patch management and lack of monitoring. The lesson here is very clear and honestly it is very brutal. Even large organizations with resources can fail catastrophically if they ignore fundamental security practices, right? So what can we learn from this? Anyone who would like to tell us what can you learn from this case study? Anyone? See, what we are learning is not to be careless and to maintain proper digital hygiene, right? Cyber hygiene. If you are doing that, then you are just eradicating the vulnerabilities, right? Now, this is just the anatomy of the Equifax failure that I already discussed. So just look at the cost of the ignored basics, right? 147 million data, as I discussed, were already leaked. Now, the second case study. It is the WannaCry ransomware attack, which shows how quickly cyber attacks can spread on a global scale. This attack began in May 2017, and within a very short time, it infected more than 300,000 computers across over 150 countries. WannaCry was a ransomware attack, meaning it encrypted files on infected systems and wanted some kind of ransom to unlock them, right? They demanded payment to restore the access. It spread using a vulnerability in older versions of Microsoft Windows. Again, a vulnerability for which a patch had already been released months before the attack. But organizations like hospitals, transportation systems, and major companies were affected, with some healthcare services even forced to shut down temporarily. The attack caused billions of dollars in damages globally and highlighted how dangerous unpatched systems can be. The key takeaway here is simple: attackers do not always need to break in manually, right? Sometimes they can just release something that spreads automatically. We are talking about ransomwares, malwares, right? And if your system is not updated, you become an easy target. If you look at both of these case studies together, the pattern becomes obvious. Okay, neither attack relied on extremely sophisticated zero-day exploits. Both relied on known vulnerabilities that had already fixes available. This tells you something very important about real world cybersecurity. Most major disasters don't happen because defenders lack advanced tools, but they happen because basic security hygiene is ignored. This is exactly why understanding these fundamentals matter more than anything else, right? If you put everything together, information security is ultimately about understanding what you are protecting, where the weaknesses are, and how attackers think. Because every concept we covered, from the CIA triad to the real world attacks, from security mechanisms to case studies, point towards one simple truth: systems don't fail randomly, they fail in predictable ways when basics are ignored. If you remember anything from this lecture, remember this mindset: never trust blindly. Always question how something can break and assume that both humans and systems can make mistakes. If you can think like that, you already understand the core of information security. And anything else you will learn in this field will just build on that foundation. So today we discussed this much. That's all from my side. If you have any questions, then please feel free to ask me.
The meeting is now open for Q&A session. If you have any questions, put it in the chat box or raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask your question.